North Korea, of course, was largely destroyed during World War II, and then, of course, during the Korean War through saturation bombings that the United States, for the most part, did. 70% of the infrastructure of North Korea was destroyed. So coming out of the Korean War, North Korea was an extremely low level of development. And the same held true for South Korea as well. 1950s, late 1950s, 1960, North Korea and South Korea were basically on the level of per capita GNP here of an African country like Kenya. However, quite rapidly, both North and South Korea managed to develop, to rebuild society, to establish kind of key industrial capacities. So North Korea is seen as a success story for many countries. That, of course, changes after say, the late 70s into the 80s as North Korea's economy starts to, well, grind to a halt, basically. It's a kind of slow decline of the North Korean economy. North Korea is developing a nuclear program quite early on, gains ground in the 60s and in the 70s. And the purpose of the nuclear program is twofold. One, of course, is to create an independent energy source. North Korea has some coal, but it doesn't have any oil, it doesn't have any gas. In other words, it doesn't have what Middle Eastern countries have, which means that North Korea is highly dependent on outside sources. In the same way that South Korea and Japan are highly dependent on outside sources. South Korea and Japan, of course, were able to take advantage of the patronage of the United States. North Korea didn't have that option. So North Korea feels the need to gain some kind of independent energy source. And that's what this civilian nuclear power plant can represent. Just as a reminder, Japan gets practically a third of its energy from nuclear power. South Korea is aiming to get as much as 40% of its energy from nuclear power. But, of course, there's also the military side of things. As I said, North Korea is emerging from the Korean War devastated by U.S. aerial attacks, and is also feeling vulnerable throughout the Cold War, but especially after the end of the Cold War. Vulnerable to the possibility of future attack, primarily from the United States, but not exclusively from the United States. At the same time, North Korea's conventional military forces are also, in tandem with its economy, is starting to decline, particularly in relationship to South Korea. And a nuclear deterrent becomes a kind of a cheap, or perceived to be by the North Korean government, a cheap alternative to conventional military deterrence.